Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, which is Sharang and Sharwari. So, as you can see today, today is a solo video on YouTube. Sharwari is otherwise occupied, and this is also not an uh, area of intellectual discovery which piques her interest. And to that end, I decided to make a solo video about it. And like as always, guys, stay tuned in, check in with your comments, and let us know in the comments what you feel about our channel, how we can improve. We have implemented a lot of the suggestions you have been giving us, and we are, as always, really, really grateful for all your love, all your support, and all your admiration. So, with that out of the way, I would like to proceed to today's topic, which is drugs, weapons, and philosophy, the birth of democracy in the modern world. Um, so in the modern world, if you live in a country like India or Japan or South Korea or Taiwan or any country in the Western Hemisphere, then you pretty much take democracy for granted. You feel like that's the norm, that's the normal thing, that's how it is supposed to go. But if you look at all of human history, then you'll find that democracies are anomalous, or they are a giant anomaly, by which I mean to say that the vast majority of societies for time and for the vast majority of time have actually been some kind of monarchies and some kind of oligarchies. Democracies, true democracies, are very rare. So the current model that we follow, democracy, is actually originates from two Greek words, demos, kratos, which roughly translates to rule of the people. The birth of this idea actually was in Athens, which was a city state, which was one of the Greek city states, along with famous ones like Sparta. This model of democracy was a direct form of democracy in which basically it was like a referendum. So, whenever the state had to make a giant decision, every landowning man would cast a vote, those votes would be counted, and based on those votes, the decision would be taken. This system was so when Rome conquered Greece, a lot of Greek ideas were actually adopted by the Romans. So the saying at the time often went that Rome conquered Greece in terms of territory, but Greece conquered Rome in terms of culture. By that I mean that Romans took on Greek gods, Romans adopted many Greek concepts and made them uniquely Roman. So the same way that Romans took the Greek god Zeus and turned him into Jupiter, in a very same way, Romans took the concept of democracy, which was Athenian in origin, and turned it into representative democracy, which is still practiced in a big chunk of the world today, including in places like all over the Western world and India, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, etc. So my point is that this is where democracy, Athens was a very small country or a small city state. Essentially, it was a city, and in this democracy arose, and from here it spread all over the world. It caught on like wildfire. So why did it happen? How did this crazy counterintuitive concept of democracy come to be in the first place, right? So first things first, why have democracy at all, right? Um, because if you think about all of the animal kingdom, or even if you think about our closest relatives, which are the chimps, they usually have an alpha chimpanzee or a dominant male who pretty much runs the group, right? But even there, if an alpha chimp is too aggressive, he will be taken over by his underlings, or the beta males will gang up on him and kill him. On the other hand, if an alpha male engages in reciprocal behavior and he is considerate to the lower males, then that society or that chimp society will be slightly more stable. So point is, even in the animal world, it pays to take care of people and to be somewhat ethical or moral rather than just work on the rule of power. And especially in human civilizations, right? Even though the vast majority of societies in history have been monarchies, democracies are completely overrepresented in the list of the most successful societies in the world, in terms of the richest societies in the world. So even today, if you make a list of the most successful countries in today's world, mostly democracies tend to be successful. The United States of America, all of Western Europe, even India and Japan and South Korea, right? So South Korea and now North Korea is a classic test case where South Korea has a democracy, it has capitalism, and it is a much better place to live in than the repressive North Korea. Same with India and Pakistan. With all due respect to my Pakistani viewers, Indians have a true democracy, and compared to Pakistan, we have flourished in the past 70 years, because unfortunately Pakistan's democracy is a facade, and the real rulers of Pakistan is actually the military. I say this with due respect to my Pakistani friends and colleagues. So democracies are overrepresented in terms of the successful societies. Now, why are democracies so successful? What allows them to outcompete, let's say, monarchies? The problem is that any system or any society has to adapt with the changing times. To adapt to changing times, they have to be able to incorporate new ideas. New ideas are often put forth by crazy people, by insane people, but they are often put forth by people who have no political say. Like Albert Einstein's ideas transformed the world, but in terms of political power, he had none. Charles Spencer Darwin's ideas transformed the world, right? But in terms of political power, he had none. But in a free democracy, those ideas are allowed free expression. And because Charles Darwin's Spencer Darwin's ideas were allowed to permeate into society, his ideas were adopted by many people. He was able to convince them through his great book on the origin of species. He was able to sway the minds of many people. And this is just one example. So democracies are much more malleable to adapt. So we need to understand that, and people generally tend to enjoy living in democracies. Why? Because compared to a monarchy, democracies provide their citizens with much more freedom, much more liberty, right? Liberté, égalité, fraternité, as the French say. So because they do it, whenever that country is being attacked, the citizens are much more willing to fight for their land and soil, because they see it as authentically their own. They feel, they take great pride in their country, they take great ownership. A classic example is when France and Germany were fighting. In one of the countless times that they fought, the French showed much more morale than was expected, and one of the reasons that the French Revolution succeeded was that the people who were rebelling were able to feel much bigger armies, simply because they genuinely promised everyone a better future, rather than just being a serf to a nobleman. um, so democracies tend to be successful. Now, democracies, especially for people at the top, are dangerous and counterproductive. If I'm the king of some country, why the hell would I give up my power? Why the hell would I give up absolute authority that I hold over my subjects in favor of a system where periodically my power will go away? Right? This is a completely counterintuitive idea. And if the natural state of humanity is to exist in societies where there is one dominant member at the very top, usually a man, and then there's a hierarchical organization, and then there's a class which rules, the nobility, and then there's a class which serves the peasantry, or whatever, the bourgeoisie, the proletariat, to use communist language. Not that I agree with communism, of course. The point is, why would the ruling class be willing to do all of that? They would have to be on drugs. And before you call me an insane person and want to lock me up into an insane asylum, to trace the origins of democracy, we have to go all the way to Athens. Right now, there is a survey into something which is known as the Eleusinian Mysteries. Now, in these Eleusinian Mysteries, it was found out that Athens at that time was a hotbed of some of the most influential ideas, right? So Greek ideas changed the world, Greek ideas influenced the world. It's actually Athenian ideas, because right next to them were the Spartans, who were a very closed, very oppressive, very authoritarian society. No matter what 300 might have told you, the movie 300, I mean. No matter what that movie told you, they were a society like that. So even in Greece, many of their most prominent thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, like the theorem, the to find Pythagoras, right? Those influential Greek thinkers were Athenian, because Athens was a democracy. So, which brings me back to the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, there has been research done by the Oxford Institute, and they have found that Greeks in that time, Athenian Greeks, they drank a special type of wine which was actually had a contamination, so to speak, by the ergot fungus. This ergot fungus releases a chemical known as psilocybin into the wine. This psilocybin is responsible for hallucinogenic experiences, and the another word for psilocybin is it's that the active ingredient of magic mushrooms, right? What happens when you take magic mushrooms? And I speak from personal experience in Netherlands where they are legal. When you take magic mushrooms, your sense of self tends to dissolve. You genuinely feel connected to everything out there, right? So when you're relating to a friend, you genuinely feel connected to your friends in a way that you don't quite feel when you're sober. So being intoxicated on magic mushrooms is like, it's like the opposite effect of alcohol. You feel more alert, you feel more aware, you just feel more, right? So what I'm trying to say is maybe one of the reasons why the Greeks were able to come up with so many interesting ideas, and one of the reasons why they were able to actually come to the point of democracy, right, where a ruler would be that uh, would abandon his own selfishness to that extent that he would be willing to give up potentially absolute authority in favor of self-governance by a group of people. The origin of that might possibly be magic mushrooms. And the origin of many pieces of great literature can actually be associated with drugs. So, in Hindu mythology, there's this magic herb or mystical herb called soma, and it is said that many of the Vedas were actually written by people who had taken the herb soma, right, which is still found as a herb in Afghanistan today. So, Athenian society was a society of warriors. This is one aspect of Athenian society. The second aspect of Athenian society, which gave it the conditions for democracy to flourish, were the fact that how Athenians fought, right? So this reminds me of a classic Hindi phrase called "Teen din jab jaladi vinay na sun jab jaladi jad gaye teen din jab beat bole prabhuram sako padab bin bhai hoy na preet." That after requesting the water for 3 days, the water did not budge, and then Prabhu Sri Ram, who's one of our gods in Hinduism, said that without fear there can be no love. By that I mean that to have any kind of equality between people, to be very Machiavellian about it, you have to have a parity of power. So the way Greeks fought is the way medieval armies in the Dark Ages fought is that they would have a nobility comprising of the cavalry, knights with their shining armor, etc. And this cavalry would often be able to completely overwhelm infantrymen, who would often be comprised of like common people, peasants or whatever, who had just been given one spear or whatever. Greeks did not fight like this. Greeks fought with giant shields, and they had long spears, and they had a sword which was known as the, I think it was known as the gladius. Gladius, correct me if I'm wrong, but they had these short swords which were important for close-up skirmishes. So they did not really field an infantry in those days, and they would be in a hoplite formation. So that's the one detail that actually 300 gets correct, where they would wear considerably more clothes than underwear, but there would be Greeks in full armor, and they would march shoulder to shoulder, shields locked. They would march all the way. They would fight their enemy, and they would win. So what the hell does this have to do with democracy and whatever? It is because in their society, especially when it comes to battle, there was no nobility, there was no peasant, there were no classes, there was no socio-cultural and socio-economic classes in their military formations. All Greeks fought as one organized phalanx or one organized unit, and or multiple phalanxes, and they fought as one. And because of that, there was parity of power between them. Third factor is that these societies are also relatively homogeneous. That is, they were only comprised of Greeks. So, which brings me to the three conditions, which are often the starting points for democracy or self rule of any kind. And those are that your mind is altered enough via magic mushrooms, for example, or any other state where you feel profound compassion for your fellow. That is that the society and cultural conditions are such that they encourage compassion and genuine bonding between members of society, where people are willing to sacrifice for their kith and kin, and they're willing to even sometimes consider giving up absolute power for a higher order principle, because that is genuinely the effect of that magic mushrooms have on you. Second thing is parity of power, as in they all fought as one, they all fought as one unit, etc. Third thing is an advanced enough philosophy and a relatively homogeneous population, because if you have a too heterogeneous population, then there will be too many sub interests, too many like in group fighting and things like that, and the societies like that tend to be not very stable. uh, so then this brings me to another thing, that if democracy found its conditions first was established and flourished only in Athens, how was it able to spread? Because these societies were the most successful and continue to remain the most successful. So what happened in Europe actually was that Europe actually, after having been a democracy, abandoned democracy. Rome was a representative democracy, then it fell to Caesarism, then it fell to monarchy, right? And then this transition to the Dark Ages, where there was a feudal lords were there and whatever. And in many senses, this era was less enlightened than the era that had preceded it. So the Greeks were much more enlightened in a lot of ways than the medieval people who followed them. Then they rediscovered the classics. And in Italy, one of the reasons that the Renaissance happened was because the Greek works, right? That the philosophies of Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and all of these great Greek philosophers who had those conditions were rediscovered. And so Europe implemented its democracy. Then these same people, some of them migrated to America, where they found that democracy continued to be a very good, viable system. And then Britain obviously colonized India. Because they colonized India, they essentially exported their system of governance. They created a giant subclass of Indians who were educated in their system, whose values were inculcated into them, right? So both Nehru and Jinnah were more British when it comes to their values and ways of thinking than they were Indians. Which is a different story altogether. The point is that at the time that India was being formed, the ruling class was very much inculcated with British values, so, which means that those values were then adopted, which led to the generation and creation of successful societies. And thus, democracy has proved time and time again that it does lead to the creation of successful societies by providing a voice to as many people as possible, by being relatively free, by providing a relatively good living place for especially the marginalized and weak sections of societies and communities. But democracies are not free. They are a historical anomaly, and it takes a lot of wisdom and it takes a lot of forethought to continue to hold democracies in place. And this was the warning that I'm forgetting. It was either Aristotle or Plato. So the very people who perfected and created democracies also had a warning. He said that masculine republics often give way to no sorry masculine democracies give way to feminine republics, which then give way to tyrannies. So by that he meant that, like, and I think that for a democracy to flourish, if the common citizen is to be willing to be uh, to have a say in the workings of a state, then he or she cannot abdicate his fundamental moral responsibility. We also need to be inculcated with our duties, and above all else, we need to be the wise decision makers that democracy thinks we are, and we need to live up to that potential. So at the end, I'll just say that I'm lucky to have been born in India, which at least in theory is a democracy. And Uttishtati Bharata. Thank you, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.